Well, we're going to try a different walk this morning. I got inspired by reading a book. The book was The Cars That Drove Me by Mark Jansen. He's a fellow that's 16 years older than me. He wrote a book on his 34 cars that he owned. And I just got done reading it. His brother John gave it to me to read. And I said, why can't I write something like that? I said, I'm not a very good writer for one thing. I never get it done. I said, what I can do is talk about them. Maybe that's what I should do. Just do these daily walks and actually talk about my first car, second car, etc. So that's what I'm going to do. It's kind of interesting. Mark starts out in a 30 Model A Ford with a early 50s Hemi. He sticks in there, sells it to some drag racers after he gets it running. Mine wasn't quite like that, but it's something similar. I should start off my first car was a 65 Galaxie 2-door hardtop 390 engine. And I think the reason I started out with that is my brother, one of my brothers, loved those cars. And we found one at a local, I call it a farmer junkyard. It was called Sattler's by Walton, Kansas. And his brother had that car. And so for about, I believe it was like $275 or $375, we were able to drive it home from the junkyard. It wasn't a very clean car though. But we made it home, barely though. So it needed the engine overhauled. So brother and I worked on that. He helped me with that. Had fun. Put a cam in it. It is a 300-degree advertised duration cam. So it made it lope a little bit at idle. But what I liked about that cam is, the power came on gradually. And you could feel it as the RPMs built. It get more and more powerful, probably up to about 5,000 RPM or so. That's about all those engines during that time were made. Of course, that's the way most of them were. I think some of the reason was the valve springs were stock valve springs, and they tended to get weak. But that was when I was approximately a sophomore in high school. So we got that thing running. We'd go down country roads. Didn't have any exhaust on it. I mean, it was straight out of the manifolds. Didn't have any license for it yet at the time. Kind of got it broke in. I remember going down and we'd spin those old wheels on the gravel roads. Yeah, it was probably a pretty good car. Suspension-wise, I think we had to work on the front brakes and replace some bushings, I believe. And my brother did that. We did also put a different tranny in there. Originally they came with they called it a Cruise-O-Matic, and just wasn't that beefy of a tranny for a big block like that. So we found a late 60s C6 tranny in a junkyard in Wichita, and so we put that in there, and that was a good move. Had to just modify the gear shift a little bit and the tranny mount. It's kind of early in the morning here. Traffic's picking up. We'll try walking down this dirt road. I don't know. It's been a little bit wet. My feet might get kind of muddy. Yeah. I'll run. Let me go down the other road here. I decided to go down the sand road. Now you'll hear my feet all the time as I walk. Another cool morning. Sun poked back behind some clouds. Now I'm running my camera in HD mode, 30 frames per second, just to save space and make editing a little easier. Still on my gimbal here. I remember putting that engine in that car, and we would often use either a tree, the tree trunk, or we call it a cherry picker on the back of a tractor, which attaches to the 3-point on a tractor. But that was awful iffy doing it that way, because the hydraulics, when they invariably would sink a little bit and it wasn't smooth. Just wasn't a good way to do things, but that's all we had out there in the farm. It was out there in the open. The thing really ran good with that, just that warmed over 390. I didn't think it was quite powerful enough. We went back to that same salvage yard from time to time. There was an old farmer that had filled up his barns, and he actually made some sheds with like old Heston Corporation signs. I don't know when he did that. I never did see him working on that. He had these machine sheds filled with goodies. They also ran kind of a junkyard. Well, one day I was there, I found like a 68 Mercury, probably a Monterey or something like that. Had a 428 in it. And I knew it was a 428 from the tag on the distributor. You know, we was all kept up with how you identify stuff like that. So I told him, I said, I want that engine, and I want that tranny. I'll be by in a week to get it. And he said, okay. Well, when we got there the next week, someone had stolen the tranny and stole the flywheel off the back of that engine. I was so mad because I needed that flywheel because that was an externally balanced flywheel. I imagine back in the day it would cost, if you could find one. Now, granted, this is only a 10-year-old car, but it's probably a $100 flywheel. And might not have been easy to find back then. So, but I got the 428. He pulled it out of there, kind of ripped it out of the car. I took it home. I remember having it behind the garage at home. Had to pound the pistons out with a hammer. They were stuck. And this thing is only 10 years old. That's the way things were back then. Things just did not last that long. We thought they were made so good. But in reality, nah. Well, I got her overhauled. At that time, we'd take stuff to Newton Machine out on West 1st Street there in Newton. And he just happened to have 7 forged pistons out of a 428 there that someone had blown up or something. So I got those. I just had to buy one new piston. He bored it out 30 over, polished up the crank, and I don't know where I did the heads. I probably took them to, I was working at an implement dealership in Whitewater at the time. I probably did the heads there. Or we might have done them at home. We did have a valve grinder machine at home at one point. And For the balance of the engine, I think I gave him a flywheel from a 390, and they welded on some weights to it to make it work. The only problem with that combo is that if it ever had to be replaced, you'd never get that engine back in balance. It'd be real difficult anyway without tearing the engine back down. So we got her balanced, got it stuck in there. I put in a Crane Fireball cam. Don't remember the advertised duration. It was probably over 300 degrees. And really the modern way of looking at that is what the duration is at 50 thousandths lift on the valve. Well, they didn't do much of that sort of thing back then, but it did have a lot of lift, like over 500 in the valve. Well, that kind of bothered me. In that, what kind of, is that going to be too radical? But I stuck it in there, made it run. And it ran pretty good, but mind you, we were still using stock valve train components and stock valve springs, shimmed up to the correct height, but nothing fancy. It'll pull good to 5,500 RPM. It's about the max on that bigger engine. I remember on that 390 we just had side exhaust pipes with glass packs, and when I stuck the 428 in there, you could really hear feel the exhaust coming out of the 2-inch side pipes. Thought, oh, this can't be too good. So just so happened that 428 had 2¼ inch or 2½ inch, don't remember which, pipes coming out of the engine. So I had to swap over the manifolds and the H pipe. Went back to Sattler's there, and he carried a lot of exhaust pipes and mufflers and stuff. Found 2 humongous mufflers built for a Hemi in the mid-60s, and I stuck them on the back of that H pipe, and that was my exhaust. They just quit right before the front axle. Gave it a nice rumble at idle. It was loud or quiet otherwise. Well, I got that going. At some point I put a shift kit in that C6. I'm guessing I did that when the 390 was in there yet, but I don't recall for sure. And I put a Mr. Gasket floor shift. Had to cut a hole in the floor there, but the problem was getting it hooked up to the stock linkage. We didn't have a welder or anything, but I had to have a reverse pattern on that gear shift. So Park was with a shifter slammed against the bench seat there. And so when you go down the road to kick it up in another gear, you just tap forward with the gear shift. It worked okay, but really didn't have a good interlock for Park. So that was really dangerous. But with that shift kit in there, it would chirp the tires pretty good. Going into second, the old speedometer would be getting up to like 40 or 50, and when it shift to second, the old speedometer would shoot past 60 for a split second there, then come back down. So she was running pretty good. I'm guessing I did a lot of 1/4 mile runs just down the road there, from fence row to where the next fence row was, which is usually a 1/4 mile. And it was probably 95 to 100 mile an hour range. Fairly fast for the time, I guess, for a car like that. I did change the rear end ratio. Found one from Sattler's again with a 354 rear end. Had a 308 in it originally. Put the 354 in it, and that helped with the low end grunt coming off the line. Oh, one summer evening was up there at Kansas Dragway. I wasn't racing the car, but just watching them race. I used to get a kick out of this guy. Had a 64 Galaxie with a 352. Name was Kip Martin. He passed away about probably 10 years ago. And that thing would pull the front wheels off the ground, ran it in a stock eliminator class. So everything on the engine was basically stock except for intake and cam and headers. Pretty amazing what he did with them little engines. Before he died, he was running a 289 64.5 Mustang in a similar stock eliminator type class. He had run that thing up to 10,000 RPM. It's unbelievable. Running in the, I believe, the high 10s. But yeah, I got to talk to him about the intake manifold. I think I was running an Edelbrock Streetmaster at the time, just a big aluminum manifold. And looking back, I should have just kept the cast iron dual plane intake on it because it was a good design. On the Interceptor engines, it was more of a high rise. It was like the Cobra Jet engines had at the time, except it was cast iron. Probably had more low end grunt than the Streetmaster. And he said something to the effect, yeah, they don't produce any horsepower. But I don't know. I've seen some testing later on that claimed that the Streetmaster is really a pretty good intake. We did modify it, or I did, in shop class at Bryn. You could cut down the in right underneath the carburetor there, cut some of the corners out of the intake so it didn't have quite as long a path, and open it up a little bit there. And that would supposedly help the high RPM power. Well, realistically, we weren't running at that high of RPM. Probably didn't make any difference in what we was doing, but gave me something to do in shop class there. We'd take it to the drill press and use drill bits, cut out that aluminum there, and to smooth it up, I'd use epoxy. Oh yeah, I was talking about the night we went out to the drags. Well, coming home, all of a sudden, that thing started misfiring, and I limped it on home. That's kind of what you do. Emergency situation, probably close to midnight. We just limp it home, park it. Next morning, I couldn't get that thing started. Found out, well, I pulled the valve covers, found out none of the, the valves were opening. I had one lifter go bad, and I think what happened when that lifter went bad, all the oil pressure was drained out of the lifter galleries, and so all the lifters bled down. I just wouldn't open the valves properly. And I'm trying to think how many miles I had on the engine. Probably like 1,300 or possibly 3,000, somewhere in there, before that cam and lifters went out. And I guess in reality, those flat tappets today are horrendously troublesome. They're not getting good materials. They're having trouble. But I did back then on that one. So out came that cam. So I guess I didn't worry too much about all the crap that was in the rest of the engine. I'm sure I probably pulled the pan, but I don't know for sure how that was. I ended up, out of the back of the hot rod magazines, I ended up getting a cam from I want to say Herbert Cams out of California. Called them up and asked them what a good grind it'd be. And he suggested probably a grind that was similar to the Cobra Jet grind, which is actually what this police interceptor motor would have had in it originally. Probably just had a little bit more lifty ground into it. So I stuck that in there. And it really ran about as good. It'd pull up to about 5,500 and that was it. It wasn't a high RPM engine by any means. I remember one time I was in west part of Newton there on Meridian. Here comes this like 57 Chevy around me. So, oh man. So I floor it and we're racing down Meridian there. And I'm about topped out. I don't know, even though my speedometer said probably over 120. I don't know if that's accurate, but he was actually pulling away from me. And so I follow him, go into roads, pre-stressed concrete, and he's just making a parts delivery there. Asking him, what do you got underneath the hood? All he had was a small block Chevy. Well, kind of convinced me. I was running out of RPMs, you know. I was running over 5,000 RPM at over 100 mile an hour. You know, 120, that was 5,000 or so. That was about the peak power where that small block Chevy could keep going. Well, that car served me well. Oh, I think when I was, I don't know if it was between senior in high school and college. Might have been during the school year. I had a crush on a gal in Wichita. So cousin and I jumped in there. We wanted to do two things. Go see that gal, and I'm going to go to Whitlock Auto Supply. Whitlock Auto Supply is kind of a high performance wholesale type parts place. It was one of a kind back then. They'd have specials like in Holley carburetors, 70, 80 Holleys for like $75, that sort of thing. You could buy brakes real cheap there. Other performance parts. But so we head out there, and of course that gal I want to see isn't home. Her family invites us in, gives us ice cream, real nice to us. And coming home, cousin and I decided, man, we gotta relieve ourselves. And so I'm on a country road west of Whitewater. I'm not familiar with that area. And looking back on it, I know how poor lights can be. Well, I thought the road went up and over this kind of a little hill. Well, most roads in that area were just straight. Well, this road didn't continue on. It curved right there. And I hit that curve. So, probably said a few cuss words. Put her into that curve, and we slid right into a mulberry tree. My cousin comes sliding across the seat there. You know, we might have had seat belts in that car, but we didn't use them. He comes sliding across, and I think he cut himself on maybe the mirror. We ended up going to getting some stitches that evening. And we didn't really report it till the next day, and cops were upset about that. not reporting it. But I told them I was kind of upset about not being any sign there saying that the road curved. And just so happened that was in a township where the guy who was part of that township that had to deal with that, putting a sign up there, the cops or the sheriff or whoever said that they needed to put a sign up there, was the guy whose tractor I was overhauling at the time in Whitewater at my job. Yeah, so it must have been the summer if I was working there already. But that was kind of coincidence. Here I was overhauling tractor engines on a guy that had to do those sort of things for the township. They got a sign put up there. But now I got a wrecked car. And let's see, the windshield was cracked. The pillar behind the driver's door was pushed in. So I took it to the local Chrysler dealership there in Whitewater. And the owner Dan Resnick actually did the work on that thing. I mean, think about this. The owner of a Chrysler dealership was actually doing physical work on an old Ford for a guy that didn't have any money. And he said, "Oh, I like doing this," he said. He kind of had a blacksmith shop behind the showroom there. And when we worked at the implement dealership, I know we took a spray gun there once, and it had a pinhole in it, and he welded it up. It was pot metal, but he knew how to deal with it. He welded it up. Kind of interesting. Anyway, so he worked on that car, got it pushed out and primed, and I found a used windshield for it in the junkyard. So he had it taken out and delivered to him or something, and he had his body man put it in, and he accidentally cracked it putting it in. But it wasn't that bad, so we just left it. But he kind of made that body man pay for that, and I didn't know if that was quite right, because that's just something that happens. Anyway, got her fixed back up, and I got it repainted. My oldest brother had originally painted that thing. We'd painted it like a cop car. Painted it with a white top and the rest of it black. We used that enamel from DuPont. Oh, they used it on airplanes. It was really a kind of a toxic paint. Didn't know that at the time. It was real durable paint. It was with hardener. It was an enamel. It started with a C, like, I don't remember. Problem with that paint, even though it was a hardener in it, after you painted it, there was a few runs. Tried polishing it out, and it really didn't want to polish at first. It wasn't a paint like a lacquer, where you can just sand and buff it and polish it. This didn't act that way. You had to get it right the first time. But it was decent for just a high school kid's car. But that car made it through first year of college. Well, it's only a year I went to college. So it lasted me about 3 or 4 years. And then we tried some recapped tires on there, retreads. There's a place in El Dorado that sold retreads. You know, radial tires were actually pretty expensive at that time. These retreads, if I remember right, were in the $60 range, maybe. Good radials back then, new ones were probably 100, 120. they weren't cheap back then. I don't know. I don't think they ever were real great tires. I don't think I had one that fell. They didn't balance up real good either. I didn't know until recently, and I saw a YouTube video on it, but the 65 Galaxie was advertised as a quieter car than a Rolls Royce of the same time period. It's because Ford was working on a frame and body design that used a minimal amount of rubber bushings between the frame and the body, and that would create a pretty quiet ride. And I don't know, we had it all beefed up. I'd put a rear sway bar on from the Marquis, the cop car that I pulled that engine out of. I was able to swap it over to the rear axle, and that stiffened it up. We had we had put station wagon springs in the back, and that raised it up. Well, the way that rear suspension was, when you raise the rear suspension, the axle moves over a little bit because of I don't know if I get my term right here, torsional bar. And so I had to lengthen that bar or shorten it, I can't remember which, but I had to cut it, section in a piece to square up the tires underneath the body there properly. But they got all that done. I'm sure my welds weren't very good. So just little things like that all the time. Gas mileage, terrible. 12 miles per gallon if we were lucky, probably more like 10. No air conditioning. I think I ended up selling that thing for $600. Ridiculous. Guys who bought it, I understand, took that 428 out for whatever reason, put in a 289 or something. I don't know why they would have done that, unless they blew it up or something. That'd be a lot of work for nothing, really. If I remember right, the vehicle I had purchased to replace it was either a 76 Mustang Cobra 2 or a Ranchero. Another problem I had with that 428, I could not keep cylinder heads on it. Of course, being just a poor kid, I'm talking just stock valves. Everything was stock. I mean, I even tried once to have the machine shop. They had knurled some guides on a 390 Mustang head, and I stuck them on there. Boy, that was a mistake. Never again. That knurl would put a groove in the valve guide, and with just umbrella valve seals, it would just suck oil like crazy. But in the machine shop, also, after doing a valve job, they'd set the valve height with their valve grinder machine. You just chop off the top of the valve there to whatever dimension you needed. Well, I think they went through the hardness coating of the valve, and when they did that, the rocker arms would all eat into the valve on top of the stem there. I had trouble with that. I finally had to put another set of heads on it. I mean, we had heads there. We had bought a bunch of old 360s and 390s or something. Had 3 or 4 sets of heads there or whatever. But, after running it hard for, say, 3,000 or 4,000 miles, 5,000 miles, the old guides would be totally shot. I was just, I was bewildered how these guys were getting these engines like that to run in Le Mans for 24 hours without failures like that, or in the NASCAR races for 500 miles wide open at high RPM. But they had lighter valves, I'm sure, but probably the rocker arm material was no better. But I sure couldn't make it last on the street. But that's why I'm kind of convinced a lot of these engines that these guys hot rod don't in reality last very long. That's why you see all these muscle cars in barn finds with low miles, because they just really weren't made to take much abuse in stock form. Not like today's engines. I mean, later I built up a 302 in my 83 Capri, and I got 50,000 miles out of it. Same basic design, but a better rocker arm setup before I needed to do something with it. But this big block, about 5,000 miles. All valves and guides would be just totally shot. Of course, today you'd fix that by putting smaller stemmed valves in it that were lighter weight, and you put roller rockers on it, that sort of thing. Put roller cams in it, all that sort of thing. High dollar, but it would probably last longer anyway. Back then, parts weren't available like that, and if they were, I couldn't afford them. There's this guy I follow on YouTube, and he rebuilds those engines, and he's real meticulous. But when he builds them, he puts really heavy valve springs in those things. And I say, how in the world do they last with that heavy of a valve spring? Because that's just so hard on components. And he acts like it's no big deal. But like I say, in reality, those engines don't get put very many miles on them before they're, probably 5,000 miles in their lifetime. So in reality, I don't know if he knows how long they actually last with that kind of heavy duty spring. But when you're getting above 5,000 RPM with a little hopped up cam, you need heavier springs to control the valves. Like I say, we didn't do any of that. They'd probably start floating valves above 5,000. We just didn't know it. Oh, I did have an incident where I pulled a distributor, and of course this is what you learn when you're young. On the oil pump drive, there's a little tab to keep it in position when you pull the distributor. Well, I didn't have that right, and when I lifted up the distributor one day, that drive shaft fell to the bottom of the oil pan. Well, now what? Are you going to pull the oil pan? I mean, that wasn't very easy in those cars. You had to jack the engine way up and all that. We just weren't equipped to do that very easily there. And so I left it in the bottom of the pan for quite a few months. It might have been when I changed the cam, then I finally dropped the pan. That's how that might have been. Early on, we took the old points distributor, replaced it with a electronic conversion. I don't know what brand it was at that time. It was just a no-name brand. And that perked up the performance, at least in the low RPMs. It seemed to have a lot better torque. Eliminating the points and just going with a full electronic. This is in the late 70s. I found out too, I had a new 780 Holly I tried on it. Oh, and it let me set in once. Started flooding out about 4 miles from home. And I had to have a neighbor there tow me home. Well, I took the carburetor apart and found out a little piece of rubber from the fuel hose got stuck in the needle and seat and carburetor. Stuff like that. When you start messing with engines like that, they become less and less reliable. But I had that 780 Holly. I just never was really a Holly fan. I ended up really liking the original Autolite 4-barrel that came on that 390, which was a 4100 series. Simple, effective. It really, from 0 to 60, it ran better than the Holly. And I'm sure it wasn't technically probably even 600 CFM. I had a chance to buy a 66 Galaxie probably about 20 years ago, maybe a little bit longer ago. Decent shape, ran, but it was a 4-door, had a 289 in it for like $1,300. I just wasn't interested. Coming up to our corner here, frames rotting out on those 65 Galaxies was a thing too. And I did have just a little bit of rust in front of the rear frame pocket there, right in front of the rear wheels. I don't remember if I put any brace in there. I might have welded something in there, but otherwise it didn't really give me any trouble. You got to remember that car was only less than 15 years old at the time. So the cars just didn't last very long back then. Already had some rust below the rear quarters there. Had a repair before I painted it. You might ask, well, would I want one now? Oh, not really. Getting crazy money for simple things like the Galaxie 500, little chrome emblem on the side of the fender. They're probably getting $200 to $500 for one of those. I have no desire to be part of that sort of thing. Another mistake I made with that car is when I put that shift kit in. I think they're like from BMM, tranny company or something like that. They made these shift kits. Shifted good, but when I dropped that valve body, I'd never done anything like that before. And I was in high school yet. When I dropped it fine, or modified it like it was supposed to, when I put it back up together, I didn't get the kick down lever hooked up properly. So I never did have a proper kick down. So when you floor it, the thing would automatically shift down to like first or second, unless you manually move the gear shift lever. The vacuum wasn't enough to kick it way down. It had enough pressure from that shift kit, so running it wasn't a problem, but it just didn't have the capability to really kick down. But I was never willing to drop the tranny pan and that valve body again to repair it. It's just a lot of work.